What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue here with my 2024 college football schedule preview and projected record series. Up next are the Georgia Bulldogs. And before we give them their schedule for 2024, preview their schedule for 2024, and also give them an early projected record based on how tough that schedule is, let's take a look at what Georgia did back in 2023. Here were my projections and predictions last year for the Georgia Bulldogs. You could see my projection for them in 2023 was 12-0, and then my prediction was also 12-0 for this Georgia team. So I did predict them to go undefeated last year. We're basing this off of the regular season, and that's exactly what Georgia did in 2023. No surprise. This team went 12-0, went to the SEC Championship. If you count the SEC Championship loss, though, and then the Orange Bowl victory, this Georgia team overall went 13-1 last season. They did miss out on the college football playoff last year after winning back-to-back national championships. Other than that, though, Georgia still had a pretty dominant season. Let's take a look at the schedule from last year. And this was a pretty easy schedule for Georgia. You look at who they played in the non-conference. They played UT Martin, Ball State, UAB, and Georgia Tech, of course, on the road in a rivalry game. So, yeah, Georgia had a pretty easy schedule last year. They did have some tough road games on this schedule with Auburn and Tennessee, but those were the only toughest games on the road that they had on that schedule last year. That Missouri game ended up being a dogfight there. So did South Carolina at home. But, you know, Georgia was sometimes inconsistent and sometimes they were consistent as well. But that's the schedule from last year in 2023. And again, a pretty easy schedule last year for Georgia to go undefeated. Let's now look ahead to 2024. And here's the schedule for 2024 for the Georgia Bulldogs. Before we go game by game and preview their schedule here, let's take a look at who Georgia will play in the non-conference. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will, of course, play Clemson here. That game will be in Atlanta, of course. It's kind of like a home game for Georgia because it's in Atlanta. I think there will be more Georgia fans down there, to be honest. But they'll play Clemson for the first time in a non-conference game. The last game was in Charlotte. Now this time it's in Atlanta. You know, over the years we've seen Georgia be more talented than Clemson, to be honest. Then they'll play Tennessee Tech and UMass, 2 cupcake games here on the schedule. And then you get Georgia Tech here at home in rivalry weeks. Still, you know, they're going to continue to still do this rivalry, even with the new SEC schedule and everything. So, non-conference schedule is not too tough. That Clemson game makes the non-conference schedule a little bit tough. But like I said, Georgia, I think, is clearly more talented than Clemson when you kind of compare these teams over the 3 years. So that's the non-conference schedule for Georgia. Let's go back to the schedule now. And now let's go game by game here and preview this schedule for 2024. They'll play Clemson here to start out the year on August 31st at Atlanta. Again, that's a big non-conference game there in Atlanta, but it's kind of like a home game for Georgia, so they will kick things off with Clemson here on August 31st. And after that, it's Tennessee Tech here on September 7th. Then they open up SEC play on the road at Kentucky here on September 14th. You know, they blew out Kentucky last year. I'm kind of expecting the same result as of right now. And then they get a bye week rather early here in the month of September. Then there's that big game on the road at Alabama on September 28th. Of course, Kalen DeBoer now taking over as the head coach for Alabama, which is very exciting to see. This is a tough place to play here for Georgia, but as of right now, I think Georgia is the more talented team because Alabama is going to have to rebuild with loaded players and everything. So we'll see what this matchup looks like going into that September 28th matchup. Then they get to the month of October. They'll play Auburn, of course, at home on October 5th. The game was pretty close last year, but this time Georgia is at home. And then they'll play Mississippi State after that on October 12th. Then there's that big game on the road at Texas. So you're talking about playing Alabama and Texas both on the road, which makes this schedule a little bit tougher for Georgia. So they will play Texas here, of course, on October 19th. I did my Texas projection yesterday. If you want to go back and see it, go back and watch that video. Then they get a bye week here before playing Florida in Jacksonville on November 2nd. Of course, they play Florida in Jacksonville every year. Then they'll play Ole Miss here on the road on November 9th. These two teams played each other last year in Athens. Georgia obviously blew them out. And then Tennessee here at home on November 16th. And then after that, it's UMass here on November 23rd. And then they close things out here with rival Georgia Tech here on November 30th. So you got 3 straight home games to end out the year of 2024. And looking at this schedule overall for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2024, tough schedule. You know, tougher than last year, of course. You got Clemson Clemson in the non-conference. Like I said, I think Georgia is the more talented team going into that game, but you got Alabama on the road, Texas on the road, Ole Miss on the road. 3 tough road games here on this schedule, but again, I think Alabama and Texas are definitely your toughest 2 games here, especially playing on the road. And also, they do play 2 neutral site games on this schedule as well. So I don't think the schedule is too bad, but, with Alabama and Texas both on the road, that really makes it possible that Georgia can go like 10-2, maybe 11-1. But that's the schedule for 2024 for the Georgia Bulldogs. Let's now get to my projection here for the Bulldogs. And again, this is not my official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough that schedule is. And this is the scale I use here for these projections. If it's a 1% game in the red, these are games where Georgia has no chance of winning in. 20% games in the orange, these are games where Georgia will be about a couple touchdowns of underdogs. 40% games in the yellow, about a touchdown of underdogs here in the yellow. I don't think you're going to see any of those percentages on here in the 1%, 20%, and 40% category because we know that Georgia is going to be favored in almost every single one of their games. The 50-50 games, though, these will stay in the white, games that can go either way. 60% games in the purple. These are games where Georgia will be favored by at least a touchdown. 80% games, a couple of touchdowns in the blue. And then the 99% games here, these are the green games where Georgia will be favored by more than 3 touchdowns. So that's where the percentage we're going to start here with this projection for Georgia. We'll start with the green games, the easy wins here for Georgia by more than 3 touchdowns. And I think you got 4 of them on this schedule: Tennessee Tech, Mississippi State, UMass, and Georgia Tech. Tennessee Tech and UMass are both really games that are over 95%. Mississippi State might be at 90% just because it's an SEC opponent, but let's be honest, that's kind of like a rebuild over there at Mississippi State. It wouldn't really shock me if Georgia was favored by over 95% in this game because they're playing at home and everything, so I think they'll be an easy favorite there in that game against Mississippi State. Georgia Tech, I know it's a rivalry game and never know what can happen. I know the game was really close last year, but I think playing at home, Georgia will be more confident in being a 90% favorite. I don't think this game is over 95%. I don't think it's over 95% just because it's a rivalry. I think it's at least 90% like the Mississippi State game. So those are the games where I think Georgia will be favored by more than 3 touchdowns in the green. Let's now go to the blue games, the games where Georgia will be favored by a couple touchdowns. And I think you got 3 of them on here. You got Kentucky on the road, Auburn, and then of course Florida here in Jacksonville. The Kentucky game, I was very close to putting that game in the green. If it was at Athens for Georgia, I would definitely put it in the green just based off of how the game went last year. It was a blowout. This time Kentucky will play them at home. I remember a couple years ago, Georgia did only win by 10 at Kentucky, so that might be a question mark going into this game against Kentucky, but I think Georgia still overall is the very talented team. Kentucky is not on Georgia's level. And then Auburn here, Auburn gave Georgia a scare last year at Jordan-Hare Stadium, but playing at home here this time, I think Georgia will be more confident playing at home and also probably have a chance to win like by a blowout. I don't think it will be a blowout. I think this game is pretty much close to that purple mark. If it was on the road at Jordan-Hare Stadium, I would definitely put it in the purple. But I think Auburn is heading in the right direction with Hugh Freeze. We'll see what they do in 2024. And then this Florida game, I was very close to putting this game in the green, to be honest, because Florida has just not been on Georgia's level in the last few years now. I should say probably like 3 years. The last time Florida defeated Georgia was 2020, and Georgia just has owned the Gators in the last like 3 years. So I think these 3 games, I think Georgia will be favored here by 80% or less, about a couple touchdowns in all 3 of these games. Let's now go to the games where Georgia will be favored by at least a touchdown in the purple, and I think you got 3 of them on here as well. Clemson in Atlanta, I know that's a neutral site game. It should be a 50-50 game, but let's be honest, Georgia has been the more talented team than Clemson in the last 3 years. The last time these 2 teams played in 2021, Clemson, they've been a downfall as a program, and they're only coming off 9 wins last year, and then Georgia here, they are coming off back-to-back national championships, and they just continue to be that really dominant program. And like I said, I think Georgia is clearly the more talented team here than Clemson. And again, this game will be in Atlanta. It's a neutral site game. Anything can happen, but I think Georgia will be favored in this one. And plus, it's a home kind of game for this Georgia team as well. And then Ole Miss on the road. I was very close to putting this one as a 50-50 game. But in my opinion, the way the game that went, the way the game went last year, Ole Miss just really could not compete with Georgia. We know that Ole Miss is not on Georgia's level either. I'm going to favor, Georgia in that game by at least a touchdown. If it was in Athens, I would definitely put it in the blue, but I'm going to, put it in the purple just because it's on the road at Ole Miss. And then Tennessee here, I was very close to putting this one in the blue as well, but Tennessee might have a really good team this year, and I think that's the reason why I'm going to put this game in the purple. But these games, all three of them, Georgia would be favored by at least, a touchdown, by at least like one touchdown perhaps. And again, Clemson in Atlanta, Ole Miss on the road, and then Tennessee at home. Then you look at the rest of the two games here for Georgia on the schedule, at Alabama and Texas here on the road. These two games are pretty much 50-50 games in my opinion. I think Alabama is still a 50-50 game. I was pretty much, close in on putting that game in the purple, but based off of where Alabama was last season, before Nick Saban retired and beat them in the SEC championship, I think you have to put this game as a 50-50 game, and plus it's on the road at Alabama, very tough place to play, and we know that, they're going to have a new head coach and everything as well, like I mentioned earlier and everything. And then Texas here on the road, very tough place to play as well. Steve Sarkisian's done a pretty good job there at Texas. We could see that this could be a very, very good game to watch. So again, Georgia will have 50-50 games here against Alabama and Texas, both on the road, and that makes the schedule a little bit tougher when you got Alabama and Texas both on the road. But let's now get a projected record here based on this schedule for Georgia. Again, it's not my official prediction. This is simply a projection based on how tough the schedule is. You count the green games and blue games as wins for Georgia, and then you kind of split those purple games, and then you also got the 50-50 games. You split those as well. I'd say they're going to win like one out of those two road games there between Alabama and Texas. The overall projected record that you get for Georgia comes out to be 11-1. So 11-1 comes out to be the projection here for Georgia. I could see them probably losing one out of those two, or actually like one out of those two games on the road at Alabama and Texas. Let's say they split those. Let's say they beat Alabama on the road and then lose to Texas on the road, and then let's say they lose to Alabama on the road and then Texas on the road. So, or actually win on the road at Texas. So you would split those, and that would give you a projection of about 11-1. And again, these blue and green games are automatically counted as wins. And then for Clemson, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, you kind of split all those games in the purple. But other than that, you kind of split those road games and 50-50 games between Alabama and Texas. And that would just tell you to give an overall projected record based on this schedule at 11-1. And like I said, I think they split those two 50-50 games with Alabama and Texas. Let's say, like I said, if they beat Alabama, they lose to Texas on the road, and then they lose to Alabama on the road, and then they defeat Texas on the road. That would give you an overall projected record of 11-1 based on this schedule. So that is my projected record here for this Georgia team in 2024. Again, it's 11-1. Best case scenario would definitely be undefeated at 12-0. Worst case scenario, I think, would be definitely 10-2. It would really shock me if this Georgia team went 10-2 this year instead of going 11-1 or 12-0. But that's my projection for Georgia. Give me your thoughts down in the comments below on this Georgia team. What do you think their projected record is in 2024? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports Channel.